The twin suns of planet Carter burned bright over the endless desert. The sand shimmered like liquid fire, and the heat rose in waves, making the air look like it was dancing. In the middle of this harsh land, a man was tied to a rusted metal pole, his back already red from the sun. His name was Ethan Voss, a human mechanic from Earth, known for fixing anything from mining drones to starship engines. He had come to this planet to repair a cargo hauler for a local trade clan. But something had gone wrong, very wrong. Ethan had been accused by the desert tribe of trespassing near their sacred stones. He had tried to explain he was only searching for spare parts, but they had not listened. They tied his hands with a metal wire and left him out in the sun with no water or food. Now, he stood under the burning sky, sweating, thirsty, and weak. His lips were dry and cracked, his throat hurt. He had no tools, no way to escape, just the endless sand stretching in all directions. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. Maybe this was the end, but then a sound caught his attention, a soft cry, like a whimper, faint, almost too quiet to notice. Ethan opened his eyes and turned his head. A few meters away, near a half-buried metal plate, he saw something moving. 3 small creatures lay there, tied down with ropes. They had smooth white scales that glowed faintly under the sun. Their eyes were pink, and their long tails twitched now and then. They looked weak, scared, and tired. Albino Dragonlings. Ethan thought he had heard stories about them, rare, peaceful creatures, born only once every few decades. Some believed they were magical. Others believed they were cursed. But these ones were just babies. They were tied just like him. One of them lifted its head and looked straight at Ethan. Its eyes were full of fear and pain. It made a soft chirping sound, as if calling for help. Ethan blinked. He had seen many things in his life, but never something this strange or this sad. "Hey," he said, his voice dry and rough. "You too, huh?" The dragonling blinked slowly. Its mouth opened slightly, but no sound came. Its body looked thin, maybe starving. The other 2 didn't even move. They were alive, but just barely. Ethan felt something stir inside him. He had every reason to focus on his own pain, but seeing those helpless creatures changed something. They were tied, alone, left to die just like him. He looked at the metal wire around his wrists. It was tight, but maybe not impossible to break. He shifted slowly, testing the wire against the rusty edge of the pole behind him. It cut into his skin, but he didn't stop. Every small movement hurt. The sun was cruel. The heat was endless. But Ethan had fixed broken engines in worse places. His hands, though tied, were still strong. "You're not dying today," he whispered. Not sure if he was talking to himself or the dragonlings. He kept scraping the wire against the edge, over and over again. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The suns crawled across the sky. Sweat dripped into his eyes. His back burned. But the wire started to loosen. He looked back at the dragonlings. One of them tried to lift its head again but failed. It let out a small whimper and then went still. Ethan pushed harder. The metal dug deeper into his wrist, drawing blood, but he didn't stop. He had no tools, no gear, no help, but he had something else, a reason. "Just hang on," he said, his voice barely a whisper now. "I'm getting out of this." The wire finally snapped. His hands were free. He fell forward, catching himself on his knees. His muscles screamed, but he ignored the pain. He crawled across the hot sand, burning his hands and legs until he reached the first dragonling. Its eyes fluttered open when it saw him. It let out a soft chirp, so weak it almost didn't make a sound. "It's okay," Ethan said. "I've got you." He used a sharp rock to cut the rope around the creature's legs, then the second, then the third. One of them didn't move at all, and for a moment Ethan feared it was dead. But when he touched its chest, he felt a faint breath. He sat back, breathing hard. All 4 of them were free now, but they were still in the middle of nowhere. No water, no shelter, no hope. He looked around the desert. Nothing but dunes and wind. His vision blurred, and the sun pounded down on him like a hammer. But the dragonlings moved closer to him. One of them nuzzled his arm. Another tried to climb onto his lap, trembling. They were scared, but they trusted him. Ethan smiled weakly. He was still dying, but now he wasn't alone. He looked up at the sky. The second sun was already halfway down. Night would come soon, and with it, freezing cold winds. He had to find shelter before that. He stood slowly, wobbling, but refused to fall. He picked up the smallest dragonling in his arms and looked at the other two. "Let's move," he said. "We're not giving up." The desert didn't care if they lived or died, but Ethan did, and that made all the difference. The desert felt endless. Ethan walked slowly, carrying the weakest dragonling in his arms while the other two followed close behind. His legs felt heavy, his throat dry, and every step sent pain shooting through his body. But he kept moving. He had no choice. If he stopped, the desert would swallow them all. The heat during the day was unbearable. But as the suns dipped lower in the sky, the air began to cool. Ethan knew this planet's desert nights were freezing, sometimes deadly. He needed to find shelter before darkness came. He scanned the horizon for anything, rocks, ruins, or even a cave, but saw nothing but sand. The dragonlings made small noises, soft chirps and squeaks. They were hungry, thirsty, and weak. Ethan knew they would not survive the night in the open. He tried to reassure them with his voice, even though he wasn't sure they understood. "You'll be fine," he said softly. "We just need to keep going. We'll find something. I promise." He didn't know why he promised. Maybe it was for them. Maybe it was for himself, after what felt like hours. Ethan saw something in the distance, a dark shape rising above the dunes. At first, he thought it was another trick of the light. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It was real. A half-buried wreck, maybe an old transport or a small outpost. Hope gave him strength. He adjusted his grip on the dragonling in his arms and quickened his pace. The other two creatures followed, their tails dragging in the sand. By the time they reached the wreck, the sun had almost set. The temperature dropped fast, and the wind picked up, carrying cold air that bit at Ethan's skin. He reached the metal structure and found an opening large enough to crawl through. Inside, the wreck smelled of rust and dust. It was old, abandoned for years, but at least it offered protection from the night wind. The ceiling was low and broken. Panels hung loose, but it felt safer than the open desert. Ethan gently set the dragonling down. It curled into a small ball, breathing softly. The other two huddled close to it, using their bodies for warmth. He sat down against a wall and let out a long breath. His body ached, his lips were cracked, and his throat burned. But at least they were alive for now. He looked at the dragonlings. They had survived the day with him, and he had survived with them. Their fates were tied together now. He could not abandon them, and deep inside, he knew they would not abandon him either. "I guess we're stuck together," Ethan said, smiling faintly. One of the dragonlings lifted its head and chirped softly, almost like it understood. Ethan chuckled quietly. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, listening to the wind howling outside. Then Ethan started searching the wreck. He found broken crates, scraps of metal, and a few pieces of fabric. No food, no water. But in one corner, he found something useful, a damaged emergency pack. Most of it was ruined, but inside was a small container with a little water. Not much, but enough to keep them alive for one more day. Ethan took a small sip and felt his dry throat relax slightly. Then he poured a few drops into his hand and offered it to the dragonlings. They sniffed his hand, then licked the water eagerly. "Easy. Now," he said softly, "there isn't much, but we'll make it last." He wrapped himself and the dragonlings in the pieces of fabric he had found. It wasn't much, but it kept them from freezing as the desert night grew colder. As they settled in, Ethan thought about what had happened. Why had the tribe tied him up in the desert instead of just killing him? And why had they left the dragonlings? He had heard rumors about the tribes of Kerator. They believed in old traditions, harsh ones. Maybe this was their way of punishing those they saw as trespassers, leave them for the desert to decide their fate. But what about the dragonlings? He had no answer. As he drifted between exhaustion and sleep, Ethan felt something press against his side. He looked down. One of the dragonlings had climbed onto his lap, curling up against his chest. Its white scales were cold to the touch, but its little body trembled with life. Warmth, huh? Ethan murmured, "Yeah, we all need that." The other to move closer too, pressing against him for comfort. He let them stay. They needed him, and he needed them. In a strange way, their quiet presence gave him strength. Ethan stayed awake for a long time, thinking. He couldn't just keep wandering in the desert. He needed a plan. Maybe he could repair something from this wreck. Maybe there was a way to reach the nearest trade outpost or call for help. He was a mechanic. Fixing things was what he did. He would find a way. Eventually, exhaustion won, and Ethan slept, his arms around the smallest dragonling, protecting it. From the cold dot when morning came, the suns rose fast, filling the wreck with harsh light. Ethan woke to the sound of chirping. The dragonlings were awake, moving slowly but with a little more energy than before. "Morning," he said, his voice still rough. "You hungry?" "Yeah, me too." He searched the wreck again, looking for anything edible. He found nothing. His stomach growled, but he ignored it. Survival came first. He needed to move. Ethan looked at the wreck and studied its structure. It was old, but maybe there were still working parts. If he could repair one of its systems, maybe he could find a signal or a vehicle. He spotted a half-buried panel near the corner. He pried it open with a piece of metal and found a few intact components. It wasn't much, but it was something. As he worked, the dragonlings stayed close. Sometimes they watched him curiously, tilting their heads. Sometimes they chirped softly, as if encouraging him. "You guys are good company," Ethan said. Hours passed. He managed to power a small device, a locator beacon. It blinked weakly. Its signal faint but alive. It wasn't enough to bring help, but it was a start. "We're not done yet," Ethan said, wiping sweat from his forehead. The dragonlings chirped in response, as if agreeing. For the first time since he had been left to die, Ethan felt a spark of hope. He didn't know how, but he would get out of this desert, and he wouldn't leave the dragonlings behind. They were his responsibility now, and he never abandoned what was his. The suns rose higher, filling the desert with their blazing light. The wreckage that had sheltered Ethan and the dragonlings now felt like an oven. The thin fabric covering them did little to block the heat. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead and stared at the locator beacon. Its weak light blinked slowly, almost lazily, but no one had come. He knew waiting too long was dangerous. They needed to move. He picked up the smallest dragonling and placed it carefully in the folds of fabric he had tied like a sling across his chest. The other two dragonlings stayed close to his legs. Their pink eyes blinked in the harsh sunlight, and their white scales reflected the bright glare. They were weak but determined to follow him. "All right," Ethan said quietly. "We can't stay here. If we keep moving, maybe we'll find something, water, shelter, anything." He scanned the horizon. To the west, he saw a faint line of darker land where the dunes seemed to break. Maybe rocks, maybe ruins. It was far, but it was their only hope. He tightened the sling and started walking. The dragonlings followed, making soft chirps every now and then, like they were talking to him. The sand burned his boots with every step. The air shimmered so much that distant shapes twisted like illusions. The heat was suffocating. Ethan tried to focus on his goal, the dark shape on the horizon. Hours passed. His muscles ached and his vision blurred. He stumbled more than once, but each time he pushed himself up. The dragonlings huddled around his feet when he rested. Their bodies pressed against his boots like they could give him strength. At one point, he stopped and crouched down. The dragonlings looked up at him, tilting their heads. "You're still here," he said softly. "Good. We're going to make it. All of us." They blinked slowly, as if understanding his words. As they continued, Ethan noticed something strange. The dragonlings were walking in an organized way, not wandering like lost creatures. They seemed to know the direction they were heading. "Do you know where you're going?" Ethan asked them, almost joking. But then he realized maybe they really did. These weren't ordinary animals. They were young, But perhaps their instincts were leading them somewhere safe. Ethan decided to follow their lead. If they wanted to go west, he would trust them. By midday, the heat became unbearable. The suns were directly above, and the ground felt like it was alive with fire. Ethan's throat burned with thirst. The little water they had left was gone. He needed to find shade or they would not survive. Finally, as they climbed a high dune, he saw it, a cluster of jagged rocks rising from the sand. The sight gave him a burst of energy. He moved as fast as his tired legs allowed, the dragonlings keeping up despite their exhaustion. The rocks provided a small patch of shadow. Ethan collapsed under it, breathing hard. He laid the smallest dragonling beside him and wiped the sweat from his brow. For a moment, none of them moved. They just rested, grateful for the little shade they had found. Ethan looked at the rocks. They were old, carved by wind and sand over centuries. But something about them didn't seem natural. There were markings, faded symbols etched into their surface. He touched one of the carvings with his fingers. It was rough and deep, like it had been made with purpose. "What is this place?" he muttered. The dragonlings moved closer to the carvings, sniffing the stone and chirping softly. It was as if they recognized it. Ethan frowned. Was this some kind of ancient site? Maybe the tribe that had captured him knew about this place. Maybe it was even connected to them. He didn't have time to think too deeply. Survival came first. As they rested, Ethan heard something distant movement, a faint, rhythmic sound. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but then it grew louder. Footsteps. Ethan froze. He motioned for the dragonlings to stay quiet, though he wasn't sure if they understood. He crouched behind the rocks and peered over the edge. In the distance, he saw them, figures moving across the dunes, the same tribe that had left him to die. They were coming back. His heart pounded. Had they tracked him? Were they searching for the dragonlings? He didn't know, but he couldn't let them find him. Ethan looked at the dragonlings. They huddled together, sensing his fear. Quiet. He whispered, "We need to stay hidden." He scanned the rocks. They weren't large enough to hide for long. If the tribe got close, they would spot him easily. He needed a plan. His eyes caught a small gap between two large rocks, a narrow crevice leading into darkness. It wasn't big, but maybe just wide enough for him and the dragonlings. He crawled toward it, waving for the dragonlings to follow. They obeyed, slipping into the crevice ahead of him. The space was tight and smelled of dust and old stone. Ethan crawled in after them, careful not to make noise. They squeezed deep into the shadows. From there, he could still see the desert through a thin crack. The tribe drew closer. There were 5 of them, dressed in ragged desert robes, carrying spears and blasters. Their faces were covered with cloth masks. They stopped near the rocks. Ethan held his breath. One of the tribe members pointed at the carvings on the stones. They spoke in a language Ethan couldn't understand. Another nodded and gestured toward the ground, as if tracking footprints. Ethan realized they were following his trail. Minutes felt like hours. Ethan's body ached from crouching in the small space, but he didn't move. The dragonlings pressed against him, silent. Finally, the tribe moved on, walking past the rocks and heading farther west. Ethan didn't relax until they were gone. He let out a slow breath. That was too close. He whispered. The dragonlings chirped softly, as if agreeing. When the suns began to set, Ethan crawled out of the crevice. The dragonlings followed. The desert was quieter now, but the tribe's presence still haunted him. "They'll come back," he said. "We can't stay here." He looked at the horizon. If the tribe had gone west, then maybe they were heading to a settlement or a water source. Either way, Ethan needed to reach it first. He adjusted the sling and picked up the smallest dragonling again. "Let's keep moving," he said. The dragonlings chirped in response. The desert was unforgiving, but Ethan was determined. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was protecting them, and no one, not the tribe, not the desert, was going to take that away from him. The desert night was quiet, but Ethan could not sleep. He leaned against a jagged rock, his arms wrapped around the smallest dragonling for warmth. The other 2 were curled against his legs, their soft bodies trembling slightly with the cold. The freezing wind of Karatar's night cut through his thin clothing, but at least the Dragonlings gave him some comfort. Every sound in the dark made him alert. The faint whistle of wind between rocks, the shifting of sand, even his own heartbeat felt too loud. He could not stop thinking about the tribe. They had been tracking him. That meant they wanted the Dragonlings back, or worse, they wanted him dead for taking them. Ethan's jaw tightened. Over my dead body, he whispered. The smallest Dragonling stirred, lifting its head and looking up at him with its pink eyes. It made a soft chirping sound, like it could sense his anger. Ethan stroked its smooth head gently. Don't worry, he said softly. I'm not letting them get you. He tried to rest, but his mind was too active. He thought about Earth, about his old workshop, filled with the smell of oil and metal, about the easy jobs fixing cargo haulers for credits. Those days felt so far away now. He never imagined his life would come to this, wandering a burning alien desert with 3 rare Dragonlings that had somehow become his responsibility. When the first sun rose, Ethan was already awake. The Dragonlings had fallen asleep, huddled together, but he knew they could not stay here. We have to move, he said. He stood slowly, stretching his stiff muscles. He picked up the smallest Dragonling, adjusting the sling across his chest, then looked at the other 2. Stay close, they chirped in response, as if understanding. Ethan set his sights west, following the same direction the tribe had gone. He didn't want to run into them, but he knew that where there were people, there was likely water, or at least something to survive on. The journey was slow. The sun rose higher, and the heat returned with a vengeance. Ethan's throat felt like it was on fire. Every step was an effort. The Dragonlings also struggled, their small bodies dragging through the sand. But they refused to stop. Ethan noticed something interesting as they walked. The Dragonlings were forming patterns in the sand with their tails. At first, he thought it was random, but then he saw it. They were making shapes, circles, lines, marks that repeated. Are you trying to tell me something? Ethan said. The Dragonlings chirped but kept walking. Ethan frowned. Maybe they weren't just mindless creatures. Maybe they were smarter than he had realized. By midday, Ethan saw something that made his heart skip a beat, a thin shimmer on the horizon. At first, he thought it was another mirage, but as they got closer, he realized it was real. Water. A small pool surrounded by a cluster of dried shrubs sat at the base of a rocky slope. It was barely the size of a pond, but to Ethan, it looked like a gift from the universe. Finally, he whispered. The Dragonlings smelled it too. They chirped excitedly and scurried toward it. Ethan dropped to his knees beside the water and cupped it in his hands, drinking deeply. It was warm and tasted like minerals, but it was the best thing he had tasted in days. He filled his hands again and offered it to the Dragonlings. They drank eagerly, dipping their small faces into the pool. Ethan sat back and let out a sigh of relief. For the first time in days, he felt a little stronger. After they drank their fill, Ethan explored the rocky slope. He needed more than just water. He needed food, tools, anything that could help. As he climbed, he found signs that others had been here, faded footprints, bits of broken pottery, and a crude symbol carved into a rock. The tribe had been here. Ethan's stomach tightened. He didn't like being this close to their territory, but there was no turning back. He needed resources, and this was the only place he had found them. While searching, Ethan discovered something strange, a small cave hidden between 2 boulders. Its entrance was narrow, but big enough for him and the Dragonlings. He crouched and peered inside. It was dark, but he felt a rush of cool air coming from within. Shelter. He called to the Dragonlings, and they followed him inside. The cave wasn't deep, but it was enough to shield them from the sun. Ethan lit a small glow stick from the emergency pack, filling the space with dim light. He noticed more carvings on the wall, symbols like the ones he had seen on the stones yesterday. Who made these? Ethan muttered. The Dragonlings walked along the carvings, touching them with their tiny claws. They chirped softly, almost like they recognized this place. Ethan crouched beside them. Is this your home, or your people's? They couldn't answer. but their behavior made him wonder if they had been here before or if this cave belonged to their kind. As he examined the carvings, a thought came to him. If these symbols are connected to the Dragonlings, then maybe the tribe wants them for more than just their scales, he said to himself. Maybe they're part of something bigger, something important. It made sense. Why else would the tribe leave rare creatures like this to die instead of keeping them? Maybe it was some cruel ritual, or maybe the Dragonlings were worth more. Then he understood. Either way, Ethan knew one thing: he couldn't let them fall back into the tribe's hands. As night approached, he gathered what little wood he could find near the shrubs and made a small fire at the cave's entrance. The Dragonlings sat close to him, their pink eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He said, looking at them, I didn't ask for this. I was just here to fix a ship. But now, he paused, staring into the fire. Now I can't leave you behind. You're stuck with me. One of the Dragonlings climbed into his lap, curling up against him. Ethan chuckled softly. Yeah, I guess I'm stuck with you too. For the first time in days, he felt a strange peace. He was still in danger. The tribe was still out there. But he wasn't just surviving anymore. He had a purpose. As the fire crackled, he made a silent promise to the Dragonlings. He would protect them, no matter what it took. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of soft chirps echoing in the cave. The Dragonlings were already awake, moving around near the carvings on the walls. Their small claws traced the symbols, their heads tilting as they studied the ancient marks. Ethan sat up, rubbing his eyes. You three sure like those drawings, he said quietly. He crawled closer to the wall, examining the carvings again. In the soft glow of his light, he noticed something new. These weren't just random markings. They told a story, circles and lines connected in patterns. Figures that looked like Dragonlings were carved alongside taller figures, humanoids with long arms and strange headpieces. It seemed like some kind of meeting or bond between the two species. Your people had friends once, Ethan whispered, or maybe protectors. He ran his fingers along one carving, thinking. This cave wasn't just a hiding place, it had meaning, and if the Dragonlings felt safe here, it was for a reason. As the Dragonlings chirped softly, Ethan dug through his emergency pack and pulled out the broken locator beacon. He had been working on repairing it since yesterday. It wasn't much, but if he could get a stronger signal out, maybe someone would pick it up: a trader, a passing ship, anyone. But while he worked, he couldn't stop thinking about the tribe. They had tracked him. They had been near the rocks yesterday, and now, knowing he had gone farther west, they would keep searching. He looked at the Dragonlings. They're after you, he said, and maybe me too. The smallest one climbed onto his knee and chirped, as if trying to comfort him. Ethan smirked. You're a brave one, aren't you? By midday, the beacon was functioning barely. It emitted a faint pulse, not enough for a rescue, but enough to possibly draw attention if someone was within range. It gave Ethan a small sense of hope, but as he prepared to rest, the Dragonlings froze. Their bodies stiffened, their pink eyes. Why? Ethan noticed immediately. What is it? He asked in a low voice. They didn't answer. But they didn't need to. Ethan heard it. Footsteps outside the cave. His heart pounded as he grabbed a sharp piece of metal he had kept near his pack. A crude weapon, but better than nothing. He crouched low and moved toward the entrance, voices, rough and deep, speaking in the strange language of the tribe. They had found him. Ethan's stomach turned. He looked back at the Dragonlings. They huddled together, chirping softly in fear. Stay quiet, Ethan whispered. He pressed himself against the wall near the entrance, listening. The voices grew louder. He heard the clatter of metal weapons and the crunch of boots on sand. The tribe was outside. Ethan peeked through a small crack. In the rocks, he saw them, 5 of them again, dressed in tattered desert robes, their faces covered with masks, to carry long spears. One had a blaster rifle, and the others held crude knives. They were searching the area. One of them pointed to the cave entrance. Ethan's grip on the metal shard tightened. He couldn't fight 5 of them, but he couldn't let them take the Dragonlings. His mind raced. He needed a distraction, quickly. Ethan grabbed his emergency glow stick and threw it out of the cave toward the shrubs. Near the water pool, the green light hit the sand with a faint thud. The tribe turned toward the sound. Two of them walked toward the glow stick, their attention drawn away from the cave. Ethan took the chance. He whispered to the dragonlings, "Stay here. Don't move." He crawled to the far end of the cave, slipping out through a narrow opening in the rocks. Outside, the sun burned his skin instantly. He crouched low, using the rocks for cover. He circled around the tribe slowly, careful not to make noise. He spotted one of their packs lying near the shrubs. It was large and heavy, likely full of supplies. If he could grab it, they'd lose their water, their food, maybe even their tools. Ethan crept closer, but before he reached it, one of the tribe members turned. Their masked face locked on him. Ethan froze. The man shouted something, raising his spear. The others spun around, weapons ready. Ethan didn't think he ran. He sprinted back toward the cave, sand kicking up behind him. The tribe shouted and gave chase. The dragonlings chirped loudly when they saw him, and Ethan barked as he dived into the cave. The dragonlings scurried to the back. Ethan grabbed a large stone near the entrance and jammed it into the narrow opening, blocking most of the way in. Moments later, the tribe reached the cave. They shouted angrily, pounding against the stone barrier. Spears jabbed through the gaps, but Ethan pressed his back against the rock, keeping it in place. The dragonlings huddled behind him, trembling. Ethan gritted his teeth. "You're not getting them." The tribe tried forcing their way in, but the narrow space worked to Ethan's advantage. Only one could try at a time, and he used the metal shard to strike at any weapon that came close. Minutes passed like hours. Finally, after failing to break through, the tribe pulled back. Ethan could hear them talking outside, their voices fading as they moved away. He didn't relax until silence filled the air. Ethan sank to the ground, breathing hard. His arms ached, and sweat dripped into his eyes, but they were safe for now. The dragonlings climbed onto him, chirping softly. He stroked their heads, trying to calm them. "It's okay," he said. "They're gone, but they'll be back." That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He kept watch at the cave entrance, gripping his metal shard. The tribe wasn't just after him anymore. They wanted the dragonlings, maybe for their scales, maybe for some ancient ritual, or maybe because these little creatures were far more important than he realized. Ethan stared at the carvings on the wall. "What are you?" he whispered to the dragonlings. They didn't answer, but deep down, Ethan felt the truth. Whatever they were worth fighting for, and he wasn't going to let anyone take them. The suns rose again over the endless dunes, spilling golden light across the desert. Ethan sat at the cave entrance, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had not slept. Every shadow in the distance made him tense. He knew the tribe would return. They had not traveled this far just to give up. Behind him, the dragonlings chirped softly, moving around the carvings on the wall. They seemed calmer now, as if the fight yesterday hadn't shaken them as much as it had shaken him. Ethan envied their calmness. He wished he could ignore the fear the way they did, but instead, he was planning. Ethan was a mechanic. He was not a soldier, not a fighter, but he knew how to build, how to fix, and how to make something out of nothing. And right now, that was exactly what he needed. He looked at the broken supplies scattered in his pack, the locator beacon, some metal shards, bits of wiring, and the glow sticks. Not much, but combined with the wreckage parts he had collected earlier, it could become something useful. He thought about the tribe. They had spears, knives, and a blaster rifle. If they attacked again, he couldn't fight them head-on, but he could outsmart them. "All right," he said to himself. "If they want to fight, they'll get one. But on my terms." The dragonlings chirped, tilting their heads as they watched him work. Ethan spent the morning turning scraps into traps. He used metal shards to create sharp spikes, wedging them into the narrow entrance of the cave. He set up tripwires made from wiring and tied them to small rocks, so they would fall noisily when triggered. He even modified the broken beacon. Instead of sending a signal, he rigged it to create a loud burst of noise when stepped on. It wasn't much, but it could confuse the enemy long enough for him to react. As he worked, he explained each step out loud. Maybe it was for his own sanity, or maybe because the Dragonlings seemed to listen. "See this?" he said, holding up a wired panel. "This is what we call a surprise. When they step here, it makes noise. That gives me time to hit back." The smallest Dragonling chirped, climbing onto his shoulder. Ethan smirked. "Yeah, I know. It's not much, but it's something." When he finished, Ethan studied his work. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even good, but it was enough to slow the tribe down if they came back. He sat down by the fire pit he had built the night before and looked at the Dragonlings. They were huddled together, watching him with their glowing pink eyes. "You three don't even know how much trouble you're in, do you?" he asked. They blinked slowly, as if they didn't care about the danger. Ethan sighed. "I don't know why they want you, but I'm not letting them have you." Later in the afternoon, Ethan climbed the rocky slope above the cave to scout the area. The view stretched for miles. Nothing but sand and more sand. But then he saw something, a faint line of smoke far to the east. His stomach sank. The tribe. They had set up camp. "They're close," he muttered. He climbed back down to the cave and sat with the Dragonlings. He couldn't risk moving now. Traveling through the open desert with the tribe nearby would be suicide. "We stay here tonight," he said. "If they come, we're ready." As the suns began to set, the desert grew quiet. Ethan sat at the cave entrance with his metal shard, his ears straining for any sound. The Dragonlings stayed behind him, silent. They seemed to understand the tension in the air. Then it came, the faint crunch of footsteps on sand. Ethan's heart pounded. They were here. The first trap triggered with a loud clatter. Rocks fell from the entrance, startling the approaching tribe. Ethan gripped his shard tighter. He heard voices, angry shouts in their strange language. Then the sound of spears scraping against stone. Ethan's traps had slowed them down, but not for long. One of them stepped on the wire beacon. A sharp burst of sound echoed through the cave. The tribe shouted in surprise. "Now," Ethan whispered. He pushed hard against the stone he had wedged earlier, making it roll toward the narrow gap. It crashed against the entrance, forcing the tribe back. For a moment, there was silence. Then the tribe roared in anger. A spear jabbed through the gap. Ethan swung his shard. Deflecting it, another spear followed. He kicked it away. This wasn't like yesterday. They weren't just testing him. They were trying to break through. Ethan fought back as best as he could, striking at any weapon that came close. His arms ached, and his breath came in short bursts, but he didn't stop. Behind him, the Dragonlings chirped loudly, their voices echoing in the cave. It almost sounded like they were encouraging him. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the tribe pulled back again. Ethan didn't relax. He listened carefully. They weren't retreating. They were regrouping. "They'll be back," he said, his voice low. "Next time with more of them." He turned to the Dragonlings. They looked at him, their pink eyes glowing softly in the dim light. "You three, you're worth this much trouble." They chirped in unison, almost as if saying yes. Ethan sighed. "Then I guess I don't have a choice. If they want you, they'll have to go through me." That night, Ethan worked again. He reinforced the entrance with more rocks, sharpened his metal shard into a better blade, and built small noise traps deeper inside the cave. He was exhausted, but he couldn't stop. He needed to be ready. When he finally sat down, the Dragonlings climbed onto his lap. He stroked their smooth heads. He said softly, "Back on Earth, I fixed machines. I didn't fight wars. I didn't protect rare creatures in the middle of nowhere. But here I am." The smallest Dragonling curled against his chest, purring softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're giving me a reason. That's enough." The desert was silent again, but Ethan knew it was only the calm before the storm. The tribe wanted the Dragonlings, and they wouldn't stop. But neither would he. Tomorrow, he would fight back, not just to survive, but to protect the only companions he had left. The desert was silent before dawn, but Ethan could feel the tension in the air. He sat at the cave entrance with the metal blade in his hands, his body stiff from exhaustion. He had not slept more than an hour. The Dragonlings were curled up, Behind him, sleeping peacefully as if unaware of the danger outside, Ethan knew better. The tribe would come, and this time they would come prepared. He stared at the horizon, waiting for the first light. His traps were ready, his makeshift weapons were ready, but he knew this would not be easy. He was one man with scraps of metal and a stubborn will. They were armed hunters who knew this land better than he ever could. Still, he had something they did not. He had a reason to fight. He looked back at the Dragonlings. "We make our stand here," he whispered. As the first sun rose, Ethan saw them, figures moving across the dunes, their silhouettes dark against the golden light. More than before. Not 5, at least 10. His grip on the blade tightened. "So, you brought friends," he muttered. The Dragonlings woke up, sensing his unease. They chirped softly, gathering near his legs. "Stay behind me," he said. The tribe approached the cave slowly. They didn't rush like last time. They moved in formation, careful and deliberate. Ethan stayed crouched near the entrance, hidden behind the rocks. He could hear their voices, rough and commanding, as they spread out around the cave. They knew he was inside. He closed his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath, one step at a time. He told himself. The first trap triggered. A loud crash echoed as rocks tumbled down the slope, startling the tribe. Shouts erupted in their strange language. Ethan used the moment of confusion to his advantage. He lit the glow sticks and threw them toward the side of the cave, their green light creating the illusion of movement. 2 of the tribe members rushed toward the glowing distraction. That was their mistake. They stepped on the wired beacon. A loud burst of static rang out, and Ethan rolled a heavy stone toward them. It struck one in the legs, knocking him to the ground before they could regroup. Ethan charged out of the cave with his blade raised. He moved fast, striking at the first man. With all his strength, the blade cut across the wooden shaft of the spear, breaking it in half. The tribesmen stumbled back. The others roared in anger, rushing at him. Ethan retreated quickly, back toward the narrow cave entrance. He couldn't fight them in the open, but in the tight space of the cave, their numbers would work against them. They followed him. Just as he expected, the first one lunged with a knife. Ethan sidestepped and slammed his blade into the man's arm, knocking the weapon away. Another came with a spear, but Ethan ducked low and shoved him into the stone wall. His traps did the rest. A tripwire snapped, sending a cluster of sharp rocks falling onto the attackers. They shouted in pain, stumbling over each other. Ethan struck again, driving them back step by step, but there were too many. A blaster shot burned into the wall beside him, filling the cave with smoke. Ethan dropped low as another shot whizzed past his head. They were forcing their way in. The Dragonlings chirped loudly, pressing against the back wall. "Stay there," Ethan shouted. Then something unexpected happened. The Dragonlings began to glow. Their white scales shimmered faintly, casting soft pink and blue light across the carvings on the wall. The air inside the cave shifted, growing warmer. The tribe paused, shouting in alarm. Ethan stared in disbelief. The carvings on the walls, the ancient symbols, began to glow too. The Dragonlings chirped in unison, their voices echoing like a melody. The ground trembled beneath Ethan's feet. "What are you doing?" Ethan whispered. A sudden pulse of energy surged through the cave, knocking everyone off their feet. Ethan fell to his knees, his ears ringing. The tribe members stumbled back, shielding their eyes from the light. The Dragonlings walked forward, standing between Ethan and the attackers. Their small bodies didn't look threatening, but their glowing eyes said otherwise. The carvings flared brighter, and the air seemed to hum with power. The tribe shouted in fear, some dropping their weapons and fleeing out of the cave. Ethan didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear: the Dragonlings weren't helpless. The leader of the tribe remained, holding his blaster tightly. He shouted at the Dragonlings, his voice filled with rage. Ethan stepped in front of them, blade raised. "If you want them," he said, "you'll have to get through me." The man aimed his blaster. Before he could fire, the smallest Dragonling opened its mouth. A beam of pink light shot out, striking the blaster and melting it in the leader's hands. The man screamed and ran. Following the others out into the desert, silence fell. Ethan stood there, breathing hard, his heart pounding. In his chest, he turned to the Dragonlings. They looked at him calmly, their glow fading slowly until their scales returned to their soft white color. You saved us," he said quietly. The Dragonlings chirped, almost like they were answering him. Ethan looked at the glowing carvings on the wall. The light faded too, but the symbols seemed clearer now, like they were meant to be seen at this moment. "This wasn't just a cave," Ethan said, piecing it together. "This was your sanctuary. Your ancestors lived here, maybe even thrived here." He crouched down, running a hand over the smallest Dragonling's head. "And you're more than just rare creatures. You're something powerful, something ancient." The Dragonling purred softly. Ethan sat down, his body aching from the fight. He looked toward the entrance, but the tribe was gone. For now, he knew they might return with more people. But he also knew one thing: he wasn't leaving these Dragonlings. "You're stuck with me now," he said with a tired smile. The Dragonlings climbed onto his lap, curling up against him. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan felt safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because he wasn't alone anymore. He looked out at the desert. The journey wasn't over. He still needed to find real shelter, real help, maybe even someone who could understand what these Dragonlings truly were. But whatever came next, he would face it with them. Ethan wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was their protector.